Hello, my name is Lorenzo Vicari. I am an architect and since September 2021 a PhD student here at ATTP in TU Wien with Vera Bullman. As I have almost just started my path here at ATTP, what I can, let's say or talk about today is a kind of a node to the beginning, a node to what I have found, seen, heard and tasted here so far. Of what, and there is actually already a plenty, I have felt myself in resonance with, in accordance with, and of what my mind got, let's say, fascinated by. So an ode to the beginning in the sense also of a gesture that instead of being retrospective is actually still very keen on concentrating on open questions. And so an ode to the beginning in the sense of an ode to the questioning. Before starting my PhD with Vera Bullman at ATTP, I graduated in 2018, and in this 3 years gap between my master graduation and the beginning of the doctoral research last September, I've been practicing as an architect. And so the very reason that brought me to start a PhD is therefore intimately connected with the act of conceiving and making architecture, of thinking architecture and of throwing forward architectural ideas, namely sense-making and form-generating ideas. And so what is fascinating and, let's say, tremendous at the same time for me with architecture, and especially when you think and make architecture as a relation of forms and sense-making languages, is that you actually think about everything all together. You are somehow forced or actually invited by the essence of architecture to think about the world in its totality. And of course, it's not, let's say, easy or possible to think at once at the entire world altogether. So what you need to do, you need to need it in an abstract way. So what you do in architecture, you need to do it in an abstract way. And I think that these total and abstract aspects of architecture become really evident when you want to conceive an architectural project that is not driven, let's say, by taste or by personal vanity or by phenomenological intentions or pathos or drama. In short, when you don't want to conceive an architectural project by designing it. So let's say that the very first intention to engage in a doctoral research directly comes from a sort of personal struggle related with the so-called design process and from the fact that precisely the term design does not resonate in accordance with the abstraction architecture calls for, the abstraction I referred before. As with design, I think that everything becomes so personal, so crafted, so calculated, and I reckon as almost mostly irrelevant. So what truly fascinates me, it's actually exactly the opposite. It's the possibility to think the architectural object in a universal, rational and impersonal way. And then I think this is one of the main reasons why I feel, let's say, harmonical resonations, or I feel resonating very much here since I started. So I started this PhD journey with the wish to think architecture in analogy to language, and more precisely architecture as a matter of proportioning forms and sense-making languages. So to think about architecture as a matter of translating these two foundational languages in order to conceive an architectural idea. And I think it is about both a question on the reason and on the method of this way of thinking. And in this sense, what seems particularly beautiful to me, or what I think it's really beautiful in architecture, is let's say, a bifold potentiality. First, the possibility to embrace a discourse by the means of speaking in a non-self-referential way. And second, the possibility to engage this discourse in a, let's say, civic realm, meaning to simply act on the space of living of people. And in this sense, communicating with people, when you act in the space of living of people, communicating becomes a fundamental aspect of architecture. And let's make a couple of examples here. Both are kind of close readings. The first one is a text, and the second one is a close reading on two facades, let's say. In this extract, the very central topic is language, in the way we talk with the world, and in the way we open ourselves to the world by talking. And it has to do with writing, in the way that writing is a desire for a full presence of language, a codified presence of language, and a desire to reconnect with archaic structures, let's say in a sort of physics of language. And writing has to do with politics, in the way that language opens the structures of the world in order to give these structures back to the world in another form. So let's say in a sort of metamorphosis. And within this metamorphosis, I think architecture stands. Offering, then, the act of offering language is a friendly gesture, a gesture of communication and a gesture of generosity. And moreover, offering is a human gesture. It could be said on the other side, in this close reading on these two facades, that these two facades or these two buildings are similar in terms of proportion, language, and materiality. They both expose on the facade an evident tripartition. Still, the way they operate with language turns them into two really opposite architectural gestures. I would say it is rather the opposite. They are not similar because they actually embrace two polar stands on architecture. So the first one is Michelozzo's Palazzo Medici Riccardi. Both are in Florence, both are from the very beginning of the Renaissance. So Michelozzo Palazzo Medici Riccardi is a phenomenological gesture, as the tripartition on the facade is solely drawn through an ascending use of materiality and the use of materiality. Alberti gestures, on the contrary, is a philological one, as, let's say, he draws out the tripartition on the facade, not with matter, but with orders and language, through an ascending superimposition of order, each corresponding to one floor. And in Palazzo Rucellai, there is not an evident and cacophonic use of the materiality in an expressive and really loudly talkative way. Matter, of course, is evidently present, but it does not shout. Rather, it remains silent. What is talkative in Rucellai's facade is the sophisticated and abstract affirmation of the orders to communicate the new canon of Renaissance. And Alberti, to me, simply is much more elegant, intellectually and formally, than Michelozzo. And it's not the materiality and nor the expressive use of forms that communicates. Alberti basically says that communication starts from senses, of course, but it is performed through the mind. And there, in the space of the mind, meaning is inherent in the language of orders. So as I said, my journey started here at ATTP from the wish to look at architecture in analogy also with translation. And translation intended as a mode, translation intended as an intention, translated intended as transparent, translation as a gate and translation as a threshold. So architects, translators, walk in such a space of thresholds and of gates, and their activity does not mark a border between these two distinctive words. Rather, translating delineates a traversing space where consciousness of something new can flash into view. So thresholds and gates are, let's say, a space in their own right. The walk, the wandering, is not about crossing. Rather, it is a walk that wanders in a wasteland where language resonates a withdrawal from representation to pursue pure abstraction, to dig out the word that has not sound, but still the word that is able to talk. So what do we do in this space of thresholds and gates? I think that we can look for orientation in an articulation between these thresholds and gates, and we can look for meaningful encounters. We actually look for an impersonal voice that can liberate translation from the local inflection of the self and from the referentiality or the contextuality. So we look for proportioning with silent words. And then questions arise, of course, but how can we, or let's say, how can an idea that is built while rendering, while coming to proximity to traces, while unveiling and restoring patterns of languages, evoke this space of moving, of wandering between gates? I think it's by writing in architectonic terms, so by drawing using a vocabulary, a code, which is both formal and textual, and that communicates through space and time in proportion. And so let's say that in this ode to the beginning, I think I have found harmonic articulations here at ATTP, and I am really keen to continue the journey.